Okay, so this time round it's 80s for our theme, and having lived through it first time round, I did struggle a little bit coming up with a project that I would actually want to recreate from the 80s. So what I have actually done is I've developed a version of a batwing top that's a little bit more modern, a little bit more on trend for now, and that you can really enjoy just popping on over a little vest top and in wearing nice and comfy. So I'm going to take you through how to create your own pattern from your own measurements and create a lovely batwing top. So coming up next is a little sequence that will take you through exactly how to create the pattern for your batwing top. The first thing we're going to need before we move on to that is a few measurements to make sure you have all the figures you need to bring that pattern together. So we're going to take a couple of measurements and then we'll be ready to move on. The first measurement we're going to need is a hip measurement. So we're going to take the very widest part of our hips, run the tape measure round. Stand nice and relaxed, keep your head up as you're running the tape measure round, and then look down and have a little look what number you have for your hips. Jot that one down, and then we're going to move on to another measurement, which is a little bit of an odd one. You want to measure from the centre back of your neck to your elbow. And you're probably thinking, how on earth am I going to do that on my own? Well, I'll show you a little trick to be able to do that. So what you want to do is drape the tape measure round your neck, pull just gently until the tape measure reaches your elbow. Once you know it's nicely there, put your hand behind the centre back of your neck, pinch it just where you've got those little vertebrae in the middle back of your neck, and then bring it round and have a little look. So I've got 44 from the middle back of my neck down to my elbow. So that's how to take that measurement. We're going to jot that down as well. We want to know how long our top is going to be. So again, from the centre back of your neck, just run the tape measure down and just feel with your hands where you would like the end of your top to run to. So you can have it at around the waistline of your jeans, you can have it a little bit lower, you can have a crop top. I want to put mine just that little bit lower because it's a jersey and it's got a bit of stretch to it. I'd actually quite like it to wrinkle round the hip line. So I'm going to take mine down just a little bit lower, and looking at that measurement, that's 68. So I'm going to jot that down as well. We want to have a little look at where our neckline is going to sit. So this top is designed to be kind of like a boat neckline, but you can obviously have it as wide or as narrow as you like. So this one is probably best taken if you have a little look in a mirror and you want to pop the end of the tape measure just at the centre front of your throat there, and then just have a little look across and think where you would like it to sit on your shoulder there. I want mine to be a little bit wider than the top I'm wearing at the moment. I want it to be quite a relaxed neckline. So I'm going to go for 14. So that'll give me the distance from the centre front out to where I want that neckline to fall. So I'll jot that down too. What we finally need is 3 more measurements, and it's all to do with the lower part of the arm. So we want to take a measurement around our elbow. We then want to take a measurement around our wrist, and then we need the length from our elbow down to our wrist, which I have there 27. So I've got 25 on my elbow, 20 around my wrist, and then 27 from elbow down to wrist. Okay, so we're going to get those all written down, and then we're ready to start making our pattern. So to create your pattern, start by drawing a line on your pattern paper, the length that you would like your top to be. Draw that line, and from the top of that line, measure across at a right angle the measurement you took from the centre back of your neck to your elbow and draw a straight line out in that direction. From the end of that line, now drop down at another right angle, and this should be half your elbow circumference. If you're using a non-jersey fabric, so a woven fabric, add 2 centimetres here for ease. Draw in that line, and then from the bottom of your length line, draw at a right angle out 1/4 of your hip circumference. Again, if you're not using jersey, if you're using a woven fabric that doesn't have stretch, add 2 centimetres here again for ease. Draw that line in, and then join the 2 ends of the elbow line and the hip line with a gentle curve coming in from the top and then straight down towards the hemline at the bottom. It doesn't have to be perfect, just a long, gentle curve. From the top corner of the pattern, measure out the measurement you took from the centre of your neck out onto your shoulder where you wanted the neckline to sit. Make a mark there, and then down from the top corner of the pattern, measure 8 centimetres. This will give you a boat neck finish to your top. If you wish for a lower neckline, then you can always increase that 8 centimetres. Draw a gentle curve between those 2 marks. Add notes to your pattern as to which sides should be placed on a fold. Your centre line and your shoulder line will be placed on a fold for a non-directional fabric. If you're using a fabric that does have a direction, instead of putting a fold line up at the shoulder, you will add another seam allowance there. To create the sleeves of your top, you want to take your elbow circumference and draw that as a straight line. Measure down your elbow to wrist measurement, and then at the bottom of that line, draw across your wrist circumference. Both of the elbow circumference and wrist circumference should be centred on the elbow to wrist measurement. Join the ends of those lines to create your sleeve pattern. To the curved edge of your top pattern and to the top and sides of your sleeve pattern, add 1.5 seam allowance. To the end of your sleeve and to the hemline of your top, add 3 centimetres seam allowance. Draw a firm line round the outside edge of all these seam allowances, and you will have your pattern ready to use. With my pattern pieces ready to go, what I'm now going to do is have a little think about the fabric that I want to use. Now, for this particular top, it's really good to have a fabric that's got a good drape to it. And by drape, we mean to choose a fabric that falls in very soft folds. You don't want anything that's got too much structure to it, that's going to fall at angles or look too boxy in what you're wearing. So I've got a number of different fabrics here. Now, a couple of them are jerseys, a couple of them are woven fabrics. A mix with viscose and cotton would be really good, or even a chiffon. If you fancy a really drapey, slightly floaty, see-through version. So there's a number of different fabrics to choose from. When you're choosing your fabric, you want to make sure that you check if it's got a direction to it. If your fabric has a certain design or motif that has to go right way up, instead of having a fold along the shoulder, change it to a seam, and then you can cut 2 separate pieces, one for the back, one for the front, but with everything facing the right way up. So for this jersey that I've chosen, it'll be fine to have no seam on the shoulder and literally cut a piece that will go up and over, front and back. If you're choosing something that's got a direction, for example, this one, that have flowers that are growing in a certain way, you're going to want to cut 2 pieces and add a seam just to the top edge. So you'll add a seam allowance along that instead of have it marked up as a fold. The one I quite like the look of is this one, which was actually one I picked up in a bit of a stash bust. Somebody had taken some fabrics into my local fabric shop that they wanted to get rid of, and I was able to dive in and have a little rummage. This one is a jersey. It's really quite a light jersey. It's got a lovely little fleck to it, little white strands in this dark green, and I think that's going to fall really nicely and look really good for this make. Right, I have my fabric all on the table. I'm going to start by just folding over the amount of fabric I need so that I can offer up the pattern piece and check that my main body of my batwing top is going to sit nicely on the fabric. Now I want to have 2 folds in this, so having folded it in once, I'm then going to fold it over to make sure that we can fit the pattern on. So both of the lines that need to have a fold along them will have that fold along them. Once that's done, I shall pin on this piece and get that cut out. And then from a smaller piece, normally just a piece tucked under the arm, you'll be able to get your 2 smaller sleeve pieces cut out as well. With my pattern pieces all nicely cut out, I can now unpin and set aside the paper pattern and turn my attention to getting these first seams sewn together. Now, all the way through this top, any seams that we're dealing with and the neckline, we're going to use a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. What you want to do is sew the seam first on a small zigzag, then you're going to trim down the seam allowance from the 1.5 centimetres you have, trim it down to about 0.5 centimetre in width, and then bump the machine up to a nice wide zigzag and sew over the edge of the fabric just to finish it nicely. If you do have an overlocker, obviously you can use that, but I know not everybody does. So I always try in these videos to work with a domestic sewing machine, but there's lots of circumstances where if you had an overlocker, you could use one of those as well. The very first seam that we need to sew is the end of the sleeve on the body of the top. So I'm going to bring those right sides together. Just double check you have the right ends together as well. You've got one that's slightly wider up at the elbow than you have down at the wrist. So it's that wider edge that you then want to match, and we'll pop them under the machine and get them sewn into place now. Right, my sleeves are now attached to my jumper. So what I now want to do is bring the cuff over, right sides together, and I'm going to carry on pinning all the way down, round that curve, all the way down to the hem. I'm going to do that on both sides of the jumper, and I'm going to bring those together using the same seam allowance, so it's 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. Once we've got those 2 long seams that go from cuff to hem done on both sides, we'll be able to look at turning up our cuffs, turning up our hems, and sorting out that neckline. Our side seams are now together, so we've got a seam running all the way from cuff to hem on both sides of our jumper, and I'm just going to turn it through, ready for doing the cuffs, hem and neckline. Now for the hem and the cuffs, I'm going to treat them both in the same way. We added 3 centimetres earlier for those, and we are going to turn them all up by 3 centimetres. Once they're turned up, we're going to give them a lovely press, and then we're going to go round each of them, with a triple zigzag stitch. So that's the stitch that goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, backwards and forwards on your sewing machine. If you don't have one of those on your sewing machine, you can just use a nice wide zigzag. So either of those will do absolutely fine. We've now got to the point in the project where it's make or break on the neckline. It's always that part, especially when sewing with jersey, that can either give you that beautiful smooth flat finish round the neckline, or it can be a total nightmare. A lot of people are a bit concerned about sewing with jersey for that very reason, that the necklines can be a little bit fiddly. What I'm doing today is I'm going to take you through exactly how to get that perfectly flat neckline all the way round. For this top, we're using a pattern that we've cut ourselves, but even if you're using a commercial pattern, you might well want to do this method to double check the neckline that they have given you, the neckband that they have given you, because quite often they don't take into account the range of different weights, weaves and styles of jersey and mixes of jersey that you can get hold of these days. And if you're sewing with a very light jersey like we're here today, it's going to require a different size pattern piece than if you're sewing with a firm cotton jersey that's got a very fine weave. So this is a method that you can use whenever you are trying to put a neckband into any kind of jersey garment. So the very first thing we're going to do is, once the rest of the garment is nicely together, you're going to want to take your tape measure and measure round your neckline. Stand the tape measure up so it's nice and easy to follow right along the edge all the way round the neckline. If your neckline is slightly different from front to back, measure round the front first and then measure round the back afterwards. Add those two together and that'll give you the total circumference of your neckline. Once you've measured that up, you want to take away 5 centimetres from that length, and that's going to be the length of neckband that you want. Now, we've been talking about bands a lot, and what I'm going to do is also show you through how to make a little pattern for your band. Now, when you have a neckband, you have a folded piece of fabric. The required width of your neckband, so how deep you want it to appear on your garment, you take that, and for this particular one, I'm going to use 1 centimetre. So I'd like a neckband that turns out as 1 centimetre. So I need double that, so it can be folded in half. And then what I also want to either side is 1.5 centimetres seam allowance. So we're working with that same seam allowance we have all the way through the garment. So when you're drawing out your pattern piece, you can add your 2 times your band width together. Then you add your seam allowances to each side, and that will create the width of pattern piece you require. The length is then your neckline measured up and minus 5 centimetres to create that neckband. Right, my neckband has been cut to the right size and I have joined it so that I've got a full circle of neckband to use. What I'm going to do first is, where I've joined it, that's going to be my centre back. So I'll fold it in half, right sides outwards, and I'll first pop a pin into the centre back there. From there, it's then quite easy to find the centre front over on the other side. Now, jersey can be a little bit fiddly to make sure it stays nice and folded, but as you go along, the more pins that go into this, the better it will sit, ready for putting onto your top. So I've got the other side there, so I'll place a pin over on the other side. With those 2 pins, I can now turn the neckband the other way so that the 2 pins lay one on top of the other, and that will let me know where the quarters are. So I'll end up with 4 pins in my neckband showing me the front, centre back, and the quarters. What I'm also going to do is do the same for the neckline. So at either side we'll have the sides pinned, Now this neckline is exactly the same front and back. If your front is lower than your back, your quarters normally sit a few centimetres below the shoulder seams if you have shoulder seams in the top. So I'm going to find the centre front and the centre back and the quarters, and because this neckline is quite a long one that I'm creating on this particular top, I'm going to pop a pin halfway between all of those as well. So I've actually divided the neckline and the neck band into 8ths before I start to pin them together. So I'll just make sure I've got a pin in between each of the quarter pins on my neckline, and then I'll do exactly the same for my neckband. Now I'm doing this by eye, you can measure it if you wish, and that's all 8ths now marked up. So what I'm then going to do, I've got 8ths of my neckband all pinned, and I've got 8ths of my neckline all pinned as well. What I'll then do is I will begin to bring the two together. So the pin that's on the seam of our neckband, where it's joined together, that's going to be our centre back. And I'm going to place that at the centre back. I want the raw edges all lining up together. So there should be just a little bit more fabric on the neckline than there is in the neckband. So each time you move from one pin to the next, you should, when you're sewing it, need to stretch the neckband just a little to reach to the next pin. Now the very important thing when you're sewing this is to make sure you do stretch away all of that stretch between each pin. Don't let it follow on to the next pin and then to the next pin and the next pin, because you will end up with a wrinkle at the back of your neckline where you haven't quite got enough fabric to get all the way round. So that's all pinned into place, and what we want to do now is bring it together with the sewing machine or overlocker, whichever you're using. Remember your 1.5 seam allowance, but what's also very important is that you make sure the fold on the outside of the band, which will eventually turn in to become your neckline, is always the same distance away from the presser foot, whether it's overlocker or sewing machine. If that distance is nice and uniform all the way round, when your band is pressed upwards, it will look nice and uniform all the way round that neckline. So that's one thing to watch out for as you begin to sew. We'll get this neckband attached and then we'll almost be finished. So there we go. Our neckband is sitting beautifully smoothly in the neckline of our brand new batwing top. Now that brings today's tutorial to a close. I really hope you have fun with it. And if you do need any help or guidance, just pop a comment down below and I'll be more than happy to help. I really hope you've enjoyed this today, and I have too. So I'll see you next time. Bye.